Hey, what's up guys, I'm Josh, and today we're going to be talking about the Kallyste Amethyst headphone amplifier. This video was sponsored by headphones.com. They sent this out. Kallyste had nothing to do with this review, and of course, as always, all thoughts and opinions are my own. Headphones.com is an awesome online retailer of hi-fi equipment like headphones, headphone amplifiers like this one, and all sorts of different DACs and speaker equipment. If you're interested in anything like that, I would check them out down below. Thanks again. Now, this is actually a weird circumstance for me where if you go to Cam Jam New York City, you can actually listen to this exact amplifier. I won't be able to make it because I have a newborn, of course, but if you want to go meet the headphones guys and you want to check out this amplifier, you can. Do you remember those slightly weird audiophile guys who were really eclectic? These guys didn't care how much something cost. They didn't care how crazy it looked. They just wanted it to sound good. This amplifier is seemingly tailor-made towards that type of person. It's a very, very good sounding amplifier, but it does have some glaring issues for its build. Let's talk about the internals first, because the internals are actually great. If you watch Golden Sound's review on headphones.com YouTube channel, he'll actually show you a little bit inside. And he's right, this is a very clean, very simply laid out, high-end device inside. But man, do I have some issues with the external build, starting from the bottom, which are the feet. The feet suck. I don't know why hi-fi manufacturers choose to use these spiked feet that you have to place on these metal pucks. Like, I know it's for resonance, whatever. There are really good anti-resonance feet that work perfectly fine that do not require spikes. So it's not really a valid excuse in my opinion. If you're buying this device, you probably have high-end furniture. You can risk scratching it with this. This also is seemingly meant to be stacked. And because of that, you can actually risk scratching the surface of this just painted metal on the power supply here. And that's a big no-no in my opinion. I have no problem with it including spikes, but I would really like to see some additional feet, especially ones that grip a little bit better because of problem number two. Problem number two is that the dimensions of the power supply unit and the input and output stage unit are slightly different. The depth is shorter on the input and output stage, which means you can't actually place the power supply on top. Now, why is this actually an issue? Well, the issue is that the power supply is very heavy. It's seemingly got, of course, a big transformer in there, and it doesn't move. However, the top unit is extremely light. And this makes this frustrating for a couple reasons. One, you now have to physically hold this while you plug something in, even though they could have built a more substantial chassis, which is complaint number 3, or they could have even just added weights to this to make it a heavier, more substantial device, or made the feet grippier and not these spiked kind of metal pucks that they're using. So I feel like this is just a huge miss for me. When you're paying this much for an amplifier, which, spoiler alert, this thing is $15,000. It's the most expensive amp I've ever reviewed that is just an amplifier. You want it to really feel high end, and things like this movement just doesn't feel very high end. Like, you can literally push this with your pinky easily. Now, this leads perfectly into complaint number 3. This thing is 15 grand. The internals are really great, but the external build here is just simply not up to spec for 15 grand. If this was $2,000, it'd be considered good. Since this is 15,000 though, I consider this poor. They really need to step up their game. Not to be harsh or brutal here, but brands like Woo Audio are embarrassing these guys for build quality. And the external build, quite frankly, it just feels a bit amateur. One love it or hate it thing is going to be the lights down below. These are neither turn-offable, not a word, but they're not turn-offable, and they're not changeable. This is something that I think they could have added to the admittedly very simple and not very expensive feeling remote. This does adjust the volume in a kind of cool way. It moves the volume knob, woo, you know, it's cool for the first couple days. But yeah, either turning off the light or a power button on this remote would add some usefulness to its very simplistic design. My compliments about the external construction begin and end with, it looks cool from the front. That's pretty much it. Now, this is a Class AB single-ended amplifier. It's got RCA inputs only. It does have an XLR output stage for your headphones, so you can run it into balanced headphones, but it's actually a single-ended amp, which I have no problem with whatsoever. This thing is generating an absolute shit ton of power at 15 watts into 8 ohms, and I believe that it produces every ounce of that power because this thing absolutely obliterates any headphone for power that I have here. It can run everything. On high gain, I have not gotten past 50% even on my most demanding headphones. Now, if you are that eclectic audiophile that I was talking about before, this is an interesting proposition because what this does, it does extremely well, but it's definitely not going to be for everybody. I want to give a quick shout out to Golden Sound's review on headphones.com of this exact amplifier because our findings are extraordinarily similar. There's a ton of overlap. I agree with pretty much everything he said, and I'm sure he would agree with pretty much everything I said. Now, this is a tube amplifier by technicality, but maybe not by sound quality, actually. This is a fairly neutral sounding amplifier with a gobsmacking amount of power, and that has its benefits and drawbacks. When it comes to sound quality, the effect of the tubes is readily transparent in some capacities and not obvious at all in others. For example, my favorite type of headphones on this amplifier are planar magnetic headphones, not dynamic ones. And I think this just comes down to the simple, just massive amount of power that this produces. If you go to a lower end tube amplifier, like let's say a Dark Voice, for example, that just doesn't produce enough actual wattage to really drive planar headphones very well. It's much better with high impedance dynamic headphones. This can do everything, of course, but I actually find its best performance is on planars. Now, where the tube part comes in is things like sound staging and bass response. The bass response is really awesome. This mixed with the output power of this thing has some really nice kind of a boosted bass versus what I would consider like flat or reference from a solid state. The sound staging is also very holographic and quite wide, and wider in my experience than something like a WA-22, which I just reviewed, which is also very high-end and expensive tube amplifier. Now let's go back to that bass. When you have a headphone like the 1266, which has a unique property to its frequency response, which is a bit of a bass shelf, amplifiers can either take advantage of this or they cannot. But this is one of those rare headphone amps that can really take advantage of the bass opportunity that exists on the 1266. The bass combination between these two, and actually the looks, they're very similar in terms of appearance. The combo of these two is quite simply exquisite. It's awesome. There are not many amplifiers I would choose to listen to over this, especially when it comes to the bass, which is enhanced in a way that I don't think I could achieve through EQ. It is super fast, super transient. It has all the texture and detail that you would look for. It's just really excellent. Speaking of texture and detail, let's talk about detail response. This rolls with the best of them. Enough said. I don't know what you would want me to say about details here because it's not detailed in a overly sharp sense like some lower end amps can sort of feign detail with. It is just simply fast. Now, what's interesting about that is actually how that translates to the treble response, which is actually slightly rolled off in the top end. But because it's so fast, what you actually end up noticing here is not really a treble reduction. It more just is a kind of just a more pleasing treble frequency response. It is not sharp. It's not harsh. It's just fast sounding, it's quick sounding, it's detailed sounding, but you can seemingly crank the volume quite a bit without that sharpness coming through. And this did wonders for a very quick, but a little bit bright headphone like the DT1990. The bass response and sound staging also were benefits here, but the reduction of kind of treble sharpness was a big benefit that I noticed specifically with this headphone. Sound staging, like I said, is one of the few really strong tube characteristics that really shine through on this. You do get a pretty good example of a good sound staging amp. I don't know if it's the widest I've ever heard, but it's certainly up there with some of the top players. And I really like the way that it's staged very well and kind of had a really good separation between the background instruments, but everything felt like very linear. It didn't feel like there was a massive separation between point A and point B. It kind of felt like there was as many small variances between, very linear variances between in distance between point A and point B. It didn't feel like a big jump. It felt very dynamic in terms of placement, which I thought was pretty impressive. Now, one thing I did find myself kind of wanting from the sound signature is a little bit more complexity. It's simple to understand, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That may sound like an insult, but it is not meant to be an insult. And I do get the sense that if you were to listen to this thing for 20 minutes or so, you would actually get a pretty good understanding of what it's about and the benefits it will give your headphones and the drawbacks it will give your headphones. And that's not a bad thing. I think some people are really going to listen to this and absolutely love it, and they're going to understand it quickly. Why this isn't great for me personally is that I like that explorative nature of hearing every headphone that comes in on an amplifier. That was something that the WA-23 did very well for me, which is that I just wanted to hear everything on it. I wanted to hear every song. I wanted to hear every headphone. This doesn't quite draw me in like that, but when I do listen to it, it's a pleasing, very engaging sound signature. Now, when it comes to a comparison against a very high-end amplifier like a W23, which I just reviewed, I tested these mostly with the Diana MR, the AB1266, and the new Empyrean 2. These amplifiers are similar on paper in terms of they're both single-ended tube amplifiers that produce a lot of power, this one more so. But the sound signatures are very different. The W23 is warmer, but it also has something in the sound which is a bit more impact and presence throughout its mid-range and its top end. Not quite as much bass as this offers, but a bit more impact and presence through its top end and mid-range. And things, like I said in that review, sound extremely solid. They seem like they are completely solidified in space. Things like, let's say, drum impacts, just in the mid-range and the top end, have a substantial impact and presence. This, compared to that, doesn't quite have as much. It still, of course, has a ton of impact and presence standing alone on it, by itself. But where you notice the advantages of this amplifier is in the power of the bass response and the speed and transience of that bass response. So sound staging tracks sound extremely powerful on this. The Tenet soundtrack, for example, sounds really great. Let's call this a genre advantage. But a genre advantage for the Amethyst is, like, I guess, typical audiophile music, things like Diana Krall, Chris Jones, because of how this handles sound staging, because of how it handles bass and detail and treble. This is like tailor-made towards that genre. Just absolutely slays every song of that type. Every hyper-detailed recording, it just absolutely plays that to the max. Some of the best recordings that exist, if you feed those into this, it will reward you. It also plays very well with large-scale sound staging tracks. The WA23's genre advantage is in things like rock and rap and hip-hop, a lot of modern music. It just plays those genres really well with really good tonality changes. So of the two ultra-high-end amps that I've heard recently, those are kind of the differences between them. I think that one person is going to absolutely prefer this sound signature, and I think another person is going to absolutely prefer that sound signature. My conclusion here, this is a price range where I don't think people really talk or care about value when they're actually purchasing an amplifier like this. They just care about how it sounds. And if you just care about how it sounds, go and listen to it at a show. You have your opportunity in Cam Jam New York. You can still buy a ticket. You can still go see it and hear it. I have no doubt that some people will absolutely lose their minds over this. It's just not for me. All right, that's going to be my review of the Kallyste Amethyst, thanks to headphones.com. You can find their website and their YouTube channel in the description down below. Check out that Golden Sound review if you're interested. I want to thank them for sponsoring. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.